Okay, everyone, welcome. I think there may be a few people still coming in, but I think we can go ahead and get started. So for those who don't know, I'm Cynthia Alcon, Professor of Law and Director of our Criminal Law, Justice, and Policy Program. And I want to welcome everyone tonight to what's, I think, a very special event for us, that we've been able to screen a movie. And I expect everyone who's on tonight has already had the pleasure of watching this very interesting movie. And that we're now able to have a discussion with both the filmmaker and with the appellate lawyer on this case. So I'm going to just do a couple brief introductions of who's here on our panel, and then I'm going to turn it over to Professor Penrose to moderate the discussion. So we have the pleasure of having Richard Ellis, who is a criminal law attorney who specializes in habeas corpus with a practice entirely devoted to capital cases. He's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma School of Law and has an MBA from UCLA. Since 1993, he's been handling capital cases, mostly in Texas, and has been
call from unavailable.
And has been handling capital cases mostly in Texas, and has been appointed by the federal and state courts in about 25 cases to date, and currently represents petitioners in Texas, Nevada, and California. In early 2018, he was appointed by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to Melissa Lucio's case on appeal, and shortly thereafter moved to appoint the federal public defender for the Western District of Texas, that's Austin, Capital Habeas Unit as co-counsel for Melissa. Our other guest is Sabrina Van Tassel, who is coming to us from France this evening, I guess this morning for her, or very early. She's a French-American film director and a journalist. As an investigative reporter, she's directed over 45 documentary films for the last 15 years for major television programs, focusing mainly on social and politically motivated matters such as women forced into marriage, underage sex trafficking, post-traumatic stress, children in the white nationalist movement, women in prison, and the Holocaust. And I also wanted to mention before I turn it over to Professor Penrose that we have a number of wonderful student organizations that are co-sponsoring this event this evening. So we have the Criminal Law Society, the Women's Law Student Association, the Latinx Law Students Association, and the Women of Color Collective. So I want to thank all of the leadership and membership of those organizations for their support of this event. And I'm going to turn it over to Professor Penrose, who I think most everyone watching right now knows who she is and how wonderful she is. So I'm just going to leave it at that. We're lucky to have her as a part of our community. So, Professor.
Good evening, and everyone. I want to say thank you for joining us. It's going to be a really nice evening. It's a great opportunity here, not only from the filmmaker on this important film, but also the appellate attorney. It's just a wonderful opportunity. I'm not going to take up any time beyond trying to keep the conversation moderated. So I want to start by introducing the filmmaker, Sabrina Van Tassel, and let her just talk to you about the origin of the film and the filmmaking process. Sabrina.
Do a film, a documentary about women on death row. And I was looking to interview a couple of women from different states. And I came to know of Melissa Lucio, and she accepted to talk to me. I mean, I was told that she would actually talk to me. And so at the very beginning, when I got interested in, Melissa Lucio among 4 different women, I almost did not cover her because there was just very little to say about her. There are very few articles in the press. I think, on Google, there was only 2 articles about her, no videos, no nothing, no news clips, nothing. Her family was completely estranged. I mean, it was impossible for me to find any of them. So it was complicated, and I almost did not cover her case. Finally, at the last minute, decided to do so, and I found one person in Harlingen, Texas, one member of her family, who actually just opened the door for me to the rest of her family, her brothers and sisters and her mom. And the day I got there, I only spent one day in Harlingen. Right away, they came to see me, and they said to me, "You're the first person that we've seen in 13 years. Nobody ever, asked us any questions about the case. Her lawyer at the time of her trial never talked to us. He never acknowledged us. He never asked us anything, about her, about the case, and no reporter ever tried to reach out to us. So you're basically the very first person in 13 years. So, I mean, that was quite incredible. And then right away, they start telling me that, there was an accident, that, the little girl had fallen the flight of stairs. They asked me if I wanted to see the stairs, and they drove me there. So they drove me to the apartment, and they showed me the stairs, and they said, "This is where she fell from." So I was just like, okay. And then, they started talking to me about, the fact that there was another daughter who apparently was abusive in the family. And, that everybody knew about her, it was Alex, and, and she had been abusive to Mariah. And they just were describing Melissa as someone who could have never done that, because Melissa was so lenient. Melissa was someone who would never discipline her kids, and that would drive her entire family absolutely crazy, because the kids, she had a lot of children, would go all over the place, and she would just never discipline them. So they just said, Melissa, it's impossible, just impossible. So and then they started telling me about the DA being in prison. So I was like, okay, so the DA is in prison, all right. And then they started talking to me about, the court-appointed attorney who went to work for the DA right after the trial. So I was like, okay, I started having all this, information, and the next day, I was meant to go to Gatesville, which is 8 hours away. So I flew from Harlingen, Texas, to close to Gatesville, drove there, and met Melissa. And that day, the very important thing was that I was meant to meet two different women. Melissa was one of them. The first one, I won't say her name, but the interview, basically after 20 minutes, I didn't really have any more questions. And then Melissa came in, and we spent an hour, because we're allowed 1 hour as reporters, when we interview someone on death row in Texas. And that just went on it seemed like 5 minutes. Something happened between me and Melissa the very first time I met her. And the thing is, I deal a lot with instincts when I do a documentary. Like you said, I've done 45 documentaries in the last 15 years. The only thing that I guess gives me is a certain sense about people, when I meet them. And it's just, Melissa, I was the very first person to interview her ever. She had never been, interviewed by any reporters. She was basically, fresh for me, I was in front of her, and I got the instinct that there was just so much more to this story. It was not a possibility. And I spoke to her, and I looked into her eyes, and the things that she was telling me, I was just like, wow, that just doesn't, I had a feeling that there was much more to that story. And that, she didn't seem like the kind of person who would do this. Now, bear in mind that, I don't stop just there, right? That was my first instinct. And so I said to her repeatedly, I said, "Who's your lawyer? Could you please tell me who your lawyer, the name of your lawyer?" Because I could not even find the name of her lawyer. That's how little info there was on her. And so she gave me, the name of Margaret Schmucker, and right away I called her That was her lawyer at the time. And I said to her, I'm like, listen, I just met your client. And, you know, I met her family. And they're telling me all these things. And, you know, I mean, I have this feeling that there's just, you know, that your client, there's something more, you know, about her. And she said right away, she said, oh, my client is innocent. My client, I've been fighting for my client for 11 years. I can tell you for a fact that, yes, I mean, there was an accident. And yes, we know about another, you know, sibling being abusive to Mariah. And yes, of course, we know about the DA being in prison, who used her to be reelected. And, you know, we also know that there's something very peculiar with her court-appointed attorney going on. And, you know, and she said to me, you know, I'm happy that you're reaching out, but, you know, I've done pretty much everything I could for her at this point, and she's on her last appeal, and I'm afraid she's going to be executed soon. Basically, like giving me the feeling, it's great that you're coming in, but you might come in too late, you know? So right away, you know, she started sending me a lot of files. And so she sent me, I asked her, I said, send me everything you can. So she sent me all the CPS files, the Child Protective Services. They were like about 4,000 pages long, you know, I mean, it was, you know, crazy. And I read everything. I mean, I can say I've read everything about Melissa's case. And, you know, that was the very first time for me. And I was just looking for something. I just wanted to know if someone had seen her at some point being abusive. And the thing is that you see from the CPS files is that, you know, yes, she was monitored because she had a lot of children, she lived in poverty, but at no point was she ever violent with anybody, okay? And you don't become a psycho one day. It's just not the way it happens, you know. She just was not a violent person to start. She wasn't a violent person with adults. She wasn't a violent person with any of her children. She had never been engaged in any type of violence at all. And she had like, I don't know, 12, 13 kids at all time, you know, 14 kids. I mean, she had like a handful of kids. So I saw that, and then I started, you know, reading her entire trial, you know, all the witnesses. I mean, just everything, every single letter, you know, and I came to realize that for me, the case is empty. Because the only thing they got on Melissa, the only thing they got on her was the fact that she acquiesced to the interrogation and basically gave in. That's the only thing they have. There is no proof whatsoever in the file. And, you know, that's not coming from a lawyer, that's coming, you know, from a filmmaker. But, you know, you're thinking if someone's on death row and has been on death row for 12 years, there's got to be something more than just, you know, a person, you know, basically acquiescing to 5 different interrogators, you know, at 3 in the morning without having a glass of water. And so that was when it all started. And I can say, though, going back to that day that I met her on death row, that and Richard knows my DP, who's basically my alter ego. You know, I mean, we do everything together, my cameraman. And I said to him when we were exiting death row, I said, this is going to be the next 3 years of my life. There's, you know, I'm going to do a film about her. And so I created my production company just for this film. And that was how it all started, you know, really. So, yeah.
Excellent. That's a lovely introduction. And you know, it's a very important and overlooked concept in criminal justice is the role that investigative journalism is played, particularly when we're dealing with exonerations throughout the country. So thank you for this film. Richard, if you can now just describe the legal case, where we are in the process, and let us know what to expect moving forward, please.
Thank you very much. I came into this case a little late. I was asked to represent Melissa by the Fifth Circuit in early 2018. But I'd like to give you sort of a little view of what happened before I came in and where we're at right now. Melissa's child, Mariah, was found dead in February of 2007. So that's, it's almost 14 years ago. She basically, of course, was condemned to death at trial. She went through state habeas. She went through the direct appeal first, of course, and then state habeas. And then federal habeas. The state habeas attorney who you saw in the movie did both the state habeas and federal habeas in the district court. And then lost there. And then the case went on appeal in the Fifth Circuit. And again, the attorney that you saw in the film was removed from the case for reasons that are under seal right now. I can't really discuss them, but it had nothing to do with this case. I was asked to come in to represent Melissa on appeal. And what that means is that to appeal a case in federal habeas, you have to get something called a certificate of appealability. The case had come into the Fifth Circuit without any certificates of appealability on any issues. So the first thing we did was not to file a brief in the Fifth Circuit, but to file a petition for a certificate of appealability. This had already been done by the prior attorney, but I was given another chance to augment it. We brought up an additional issue, which was the issue, the deprivation of the right to present a complete defense, which had not been brought up by the prior attorney. And that turned out to be the one issue that we did get a certificate of appealability on. And then basically what happened was there was more briefing on that issue, which was, as I said, the only issue granted a certificate of appealability. And then last year there was an oral argument in the Fifth Circuit. I argued it orally, and we got a reversal. Basically, and I think that the movie brings this out very, very clearly. The movie starts off with the confession, the interrogation, and the so-called confession. And it's important to realize that Melissa did not confess, has never confessed to killing Mariah. She confessed to abusing her. But that confession was false. That confession was coerced. That confession was a result of her background, her position as a battered woman, her position of subservience, and a history of very abusive relationships. So that confession that the film very, very appropriately began with was the key to the prosecution's case. One could say it was the prosecution's case because there were no direct witnesses to the death of Mariah. So, and I think the film makes this somewhat clear too. There were two experts that the defense wanted to present to cast doubt on the validity of Melissa's confession. Norma Villanueva, a social worker, and Dr. Pinkerman, a psychologist. The court disallowed that testimony. And basically there is a line of cases, Crane versus Kentucky and Chambers versus Mississippi, that say that state evidentiary rules cannot override the right to a complete defense, your due process rights to present a complete defense. So that was the basis of the reversal in the Fifth Circuit, that the state basically hobbled the trial court, hobbled the defense's case by not allowing them to cast any doubt on that confession that you saw in the movie. And of course, the obvious question for any juror would have been, why would someone confess falsely to something that she did not do? And that's what these experts were trying to tell the jury, but they were not allowed to do that. One of the experts, I think it was Dr. Pinkerman was in the movie, but there were two experts there that would have cast doubt on the confession itself. So basically, we were able to get a reversal on the basis of the deprivation of the right to present a complete defense. And I should mention that shortly after I was appointed, I did ask the Federal Public Defender Capital Habeas Unit for the Western District of Texas in Austin to come in as my co-counsel, mainly because this case has never been investigated. Sabrina has actually done more investigation on this case than any of the attorneys have done up to this date. we needed a lot of resources. We needed a lot of investigation here. There's a lot of people, as she said, many of these people, especially the children, Melissa's children, were never interviewed by the attorneys. The ones that did come forward, they were not encouraged to testify. And the case was a mess, frankly. And so basically I've had a lot of help, and I want to give them a lot of credit, from the Western District, Federal Public Defender for the Western District of Texas, Capital Habeas Unit. Now, where are we now? Well, basically, after the reversal, the state petitioned for rehearing en banc, meaning the entire Fifth Circuit Court. And that was successful. So we had round 2 with more briefs, and basically it's gone en banc now. We submitted a brief, they submitted a brief. I was scheduled to give an oral argument in May, which was canceled along with all the other oral arguments, I think, in the country because of the virus. Instead, we submitted written questions and answers. The court posed questions in lieu of oral argument. And while I did not prefer that, of course, to the oral argument, it was a done deal. Basically, that's what happened. So right now, the questions have been submitted and answered, and we are pending a decision in the Fifth Circuit. I think that's about it, basically. This is a case, basically, where Melissa really has never had a chance. It's an exemplar of racial discrimination. The way that this case was handled, it was absolutely abominable. She's never had a voice until now, and I really want to thank Melissa for giving her case, giving her a public voice now that she's never had before. So thank you for this wonderful film.
Excellent. So for the participants now, what we're going to do is move into a question and answer format. So what I'd love for you to do is send some questions under the Q&A function. And in the meantime, we already have a few questions, so I'm going to start sending them back and forth between Sabrina and Richard. Sabrina, I'd really like to start with you. I'd like to know why this movie? You said originally you're looking at women on death row. Is your goal here to tell Melissa's story, or is your goal to do, as Richard has indicated, investigative journalism and hopefully help her case?
It's both, really. I think through Melissa's story, you really, I mean, how can I put this? I think Melissa checked everything, you know. She was poor, she is Hispanic, she had a history of drug abuse, she had way too many children. And, you know, basically, I feel that that's really the reason why Melissa is on death row, is because of what she represents. And I thought, you know, also the fact that, you know, the press had never covered her case was also very interesting. It was just like, oh, well, she's not even interesting enough to the press to be covered. You know, it's just like, let's forget about Melissa Lucio, okay? Let's get rid of Melissa Lucio and all the Melissa Lucios out there and everything they represent. And so my goal was really to make a character study of, you know, who is Melissa Lucio? Because if you read like 5 lines about her, you're like, oh, well, okay, I know the story. Okay, too many children on drugs, you know, okay, I know the story, you know, get rid of her. And, you know, a lot of the people who are wrongly accused and some on death row are very flawed characters like Melissa. They're not the girl next door. You understand? I mean, they are people like her. And that's because they have all these flaws, that they are where they are, you know, and that, you know, they can't basically defend themselves. So I wanted to show all this. I wanted to show also, you know, how, you know, you believe at the very beginning of the film that she's guilty, and then, you know, I'm bringing all these different elements that maybe a court of law can't really bring, you know, about, you know, her childhood and the fact that, you know, she was, you know, sexually abused, and that, was probably the reason why, you know, she did all these kids, and that, you know, she chose the wrong partners and started living this life, and basically, you know, how CPS really did not help this family. And, you know, and basically, you know, I mean, when you're reading the files, you're thinking at this point, you know, at some point there's going to be an accident. I can tell you it was going to be Mariah, but it could have been any other children, you know, because there were just too many children living in poverty and all this, and she was on her own and she had no help. So I wanted to show that, but at the same time, I mean, once I put my hands on everything, comes in the investigative part, where everything you see in the film, I have 10 more people acquiescing to everything. Do you understand? I mean, what I'm saying is that, you know, I went and I interviewed every single one of her neighbors. I interviewed everybody in the family. You know, when you have one person talking about Alex, I have 5. When you have one person talking about Peter Gilman, I have 10. And Villalobos, the DA, let's not even talk about him. You know, I have, you know, I mean, he's done, okay? So, I mean, basically, how little investigation. And also, I mean, for me, I want to understand how, you know, basically, they offer her a plea deal, which is, okay, say you did it and you take 30 years. And once she says to them, actually, no, I'm not guilty. I'm not going to, you know, acquiesce something that, you know, I didn't do. And I'm not going to take the plea deal because I did not kill my daughter. It goes from 30 years to death row. I mean, I just want to understand this, okay? How, you know, if she is such a danger to society, why they offered her 30 years to start, you know? So basically, the deal, I mean, and once I realized that, you know, once you turn away a deal, your chances of losing, you know, in the trial are up to 90%. So basically, the poor, you know, the brown, the blacks don't have a lot of options. It's, you know, we either take the deal, even if, you know, we're not guilty, or basically, you know, if we go to court, you know, we're probably going to lose. And so that was something that I wanted to show as well in the film. You know, I mean, people keep asking me the same questions over and over again. Oh, well, you know, if she's not guilty, why is she on death row? Well, before I did this film, I could have asked the exact same question myself. Now that I've actually been in, you know, and investigated, you know, this case, I'm like, wow, your chances of ending up on death row when you are black, brown, poor are very high.
Sabrina, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I want to segue over to Richard, because I'm getting a good mix of questions for you as the filmmaker and Richard for you as the attorney. Was there anyone that you wanted to talk to interview for this movie that refused? A question's been asked. There have been none of the fathers, for example, of the children.
Oh yeah, the fathers, absolutely.
So did they refuse to be interviewed?
Yes, I've reached out to both. Guadalupe Lucio, who's the father of the 5 eldest kids, reached out to him for over 2 years, never wanted to speak to me. And then her last partner, who is the father of the 8 other kids, always refused. He basically said, you know, this story is behind me. It's done. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. And I even interviewed his lawyer, you know, and his lawyer even reached out to him. And the thing is, I have a stack of letters for 3 years because he was incarcerated as well. I mean, so her partner basically got 4 years for reckless. I think it was child endangerment, you know, reckless, you know, behavior. Anyway, he got 4 years, and during those 4 years, he wrote to Melissa, and I have all these letters. I have her letters, I have his letters. And at no point does he say to her, you've done something wrong, or, and at no point does she say, oh, well, I did something wrong. I mean, there's none of that in those letters for like 3 years. So I really thought, he'd speak to me. And also his lawyer said to me, I mean, at the time he was just really convinced that she hadn't done anything and that, he wanted to help her. So I was a little surprised why he would not speak to me. I guess, I mean, death row is like an atomic bomb in a family. You asked me who, did not want to speak to me. Yeah, those two, the men in her life did not want to. But, in order to get the children to talk to me, it took me, I mean, months. Her court-appointed attorney, Peter Gilman, for 1.5 years did not answer any of my phone calls or any emails. I just happened to bump into him in front of the Brownsville courthouse and say to him, hey, Mr. Gilman, Sabrina Van Tassel, you got to speak to me. And he was just like, you caught me. So, and I was just like, listen, you got to talk to me. There's just no way. I mean, you have to, I just basically convinced him I don't know how. And he spoke to me. And same thing for Alfredo Padilla, who was the prosecutor in the case. Of course, I mean, he basically hanged up on me for 1 year. I would call him every 2-3 months, and he would just, hang up on me. And finally, I caught him at the courthouse, and he said 5 minutes. He gave me an hour. So, so just to be clear that the people who are in the film, it wasn't easy to get them. Okay, I mean, it was just almost impossible, and it was just, really incredible that they, at the end, after 2 years of chasing them, they accepted to talk to me. But yeah, the men in her life did not. I would have loved to speak to them both, because I thought, and that's the reason why I kind of did not, really talk about them much more, because I didn't have anything and they wouldn't talk to me. And also, I guess it would have been great to interview Armando Villalobos, from, his state prison, but that was impossible. So I would have loved to do that. But apart from that, no, I mean, I pretty much, I mean, I was surprised at the end that I ended up talking to so many people. Yeah, but it was a very, very, very difficult film to make. And it was very difficult to interview most of these people. It was very sensitive.
Thank you. Richard, I'd like to segue now to you. I mean, one of the things that's amazing for our students and those listening today to hear is the persistence that Sabrina showed. I mean, that certainly is what zealous advocates and lawyers are expected to do. I mean, the fact that she was able to sit down with the daughter, who is a key witness and a key player in this particular case. One of the students asked, why would a trial lawyer who's supposed to be a zealous advocate for his client or her client not have the daughter come testify in a trial like this?
Well, that's a very good question.
Good question.
We still don't know the answer in this case, why he didn't. There is some evidence there that he said to the daughter that came forward with this evidence, well, we really don't want to present you. We don't want to mess your life up. So, it's hard to explain the motivation here. What Sabrina has pointed to are some very suspicious circumstances. Immediately after the trial, Gilman becomes a prosecutor. He may have had his eye open, for that job, that opening. I don't know. But it certainly is not within the realm of professional responsibility, within the realm of Strickland effective assistance of counsel to do that. You don't throw your client under the bus because it might hurt, another young girl. So he certainly had an obligation. The evidence was not hard to uncover. Sabrina uncovered it, and she's not a lawyer, and she's not an investigator. She's a filmmaker. This evidence was out there waiting. If he talked to the other kids, there was a lot of evidence that she did fall down those stairs. Some of the kids had seen it, and yet they sort of did a half-baked presentation on, well, this could have happened. So, it's very hard to understand why, this was not presented when it should have been presented, which is at the trial.
If I may say something?
Sure.
Okay. When I interviewed Peter Gilman, I asked him a very important question, and I asked him maybe 8 times because he would never answer. I said to him, what was your strategy? And blank. He kept going, sideways. I said, no, excuse me. What was your strategy? Was your strategy to say that, there was an accident? What was your strategy? And basically he had no strategy. I mean, it was just, he had no strategy whatsoever. He couldn't explain. Why, well, his big argument was, basically those children were animals, and, they would have run all over the court, and they would have, basically pissed off the jurors. That was his argument. Or nobody could have told me anything, or, and I mean, really, if you see the interview, the first half hour of his interview, you think he's a prosecutor. If I showed you the first half hour of his interview, you'd be like, okay, no way was he trying to defend Melissa. At no point. He basically thought that, those children were animals and she was an unfit mom. And that's it, And actually, there's one thing also I want to add. When Melissa was sentenced to death row, her sisters came to see Peter Gilman and thank him at the end of the trial. Believe it or not, these are the kind of people, they thanked him. And they said, Mr. Gilman, what can we do to get the children back? We'd like to get the kids. And he said to them, let them get lost in the system.
So, Richard, I want to come back to you. Sabrina's giving such amazing context, and it just keeps making me think, as someone who works on criminal defense cases like you do, the importance of a good investigator, right? She's an investigative journalist, even though she's a filmmaker. What she uncovered, as you said, was there available to be found, but it wasn't. And so a couple of things the students have asked, I'm going to layer these questions and see if you can address them. The first is, how do lawyers go about choosing which witnesses they're going to present? That's number one. Number two is, you've been doing this for a long time. Does seeing cases like this still surprise you? And then the third question is, how do we as attorneys work to prevent injustices like appear to be happening in this very case?
Yeah, these are all really good questions. First, how do attorneys go about choosing what witnesses to present? It's extremely idiosyncratic. I don't think, I have done probably 30 capital cases, and I don't see any pattern there. I see certain lawyers reaching out for witnesses with good investigators. I see other attorneys not doing anything. For instance, I have a case right now in Nevada where the appointed counsel went to trial 5 days after she was appointed to the case. So obviously no investigation could be done. So there's such a wide variety there. I will say this, that money enters into it very strongly. The funding, the resources available. I've done a few cases. Most of my cases have been in Texas. and I've done very few in California, but the funding disparities there are really extremely dispositive of how much and how deeply they go into the witnesses, into the investigation, into the presentation in court. So, we see very, very, sparse resources devoted to these cases in Texas, and in California, the funding is much different. So that's one aspect of it, idiosyncratic plus funding resources available. As a general rule, I mean, you generally want to present, the witnesses that are going to poke holes in the state's case, and that's what you just do not see in this case here. There was really the major effort that they had to poke holes in the state's case were these two experts, and they were not allowed to testify. So, I think that's the best answer I can give here. And the second question had to do with, what was it?
So I think the question was, what can lawyers do to prevent this? I mean, if as you indicated, you think there is racial issues relating to this case, that there's racial disparity in criminal justice, we know there's a lack of adequate funding. What can lawyers do to combat these systemic issues in the Texas criminal justice system?
Well, you got to stand up there and fight. One thing they could do, and I think is not done frequently enough, is to cite, as was done here, sort of haphazardly, cite the right to present a complete defense. When a judge cuts you off on an investigator's funding, when a judge cuts you off on an expert's funding, tell the judge that, look, under Chambers, I'll give you the cites here if you want for the law school students here.
It may be an easier thing to do because we've got a separate question of this. The Fifth Circuit didn't necessarily describe what this complete defense is, and it's not something necessarily we study in the basic criminal procedure class. So can you give a short description of what that legal challenge is?
Yes, basically the main cases are Chambers versus Mississippi and Crane versus Kentucky. And those cases say that you cannot be deprived of the right to present a defense based on some state evidentiary rule if the defense you want to present is vital. For instance, a state hearsay rule cannot overrule the right to present your defense. So that's why I say it's very important, I think, for trial attorneys to keep these cases in mind, because, when the judge says, no, I'm not going to fund that, you get up and you yell about, I'm being deprived of my right to present a complete defense under due process, 14th Amendment due process, and your 5th and 6th Amendment right to counsel. So, I don't know. It's sort of this is what the right to complete defense is all about. It's about due process. And what these cases say is that they cannot deprive you of due process, for instance, by saying this testimony would be irrelevant under state evidentiary rules. State evidentiary rules have to bend to the Constitution, and the Constitution says that you have a right to present a case. You have a due process right to present a defense to your case. So, get in there and cite Chambers and Crane. I think it's a big lesson to be learned from this case.
Excellent. And as I understand it, Bessie is placing in the chat feature for everyone the citation, the case that you're mentioning. So thank you for that. Sabrina, I want to come back to you. There's a series of questions, and like Richard, I'm going to try and list them and then let you respond. One question, so there's three coming at you. The first one is this your first exposure to Texas? The second is, do you think you'll do any more films about criminal justice? And then the third is, how long did it take you to film and edit this piece?
Okay, so yes, it was my very first time, investigating in Texas, and I really got to know Texas. It's very interesting. It's for me a very interesting place because I met some just incredible people. And the nicest people, and at the same time, I mean, the justice system, I mean, it's just so brutal. I was just like, I guess it's throughout the U.S., but it's just, there's just so many people on death row in Texas, and it's one of the states where they get executed. So it was just really interesting to do that and be in Texas. Yes, to answer the second question, that really, I know I'm a good investigator, and I don't take no for an answer. So I'm pretty persistent. Richard can acquiesce to that, basically, because even with him, it wasn't that easy. But yeah, you have to, and it's given me, I guess when you do a film like this, and you want to do more. You want to do more, and you want to help out more, and you're thinking, well, maybe I can maybe make a difference. Just the fact that Melissa, that was a name that had not been pronounced in Brownsville for 14 years. When I came down there, they were like, oh, Melissa Lucio, wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. And just, the idea that she could be, dead or, executed without anything being done about her, like her life didn't matter, is really, for me, just unthinkable. So yes, my answer to, would I be interested in doing more film like this? Absolutely. Now, a film like this one took a long time. I was only allowed to interview Melissa 1 hour every 3 months. I interviewed her 5 times, so the filming was like about a year and a half. It was also very sensitive, like I mentioned, so I basically did not want the different members of the family communicating. So I kind of, divided, every single, every 3 months I would basically interview different people, her immediate family, her estranged kids. There were sides about the, some children had taken sides, so I was just trying to, not have them talk to each other, and then all the political part where, clearly they were not eager to speak to me. So yeah, that took a very long time, but the editing took a very, very, very long time. The editing took 6 months. Just because, there's just so many things I had filmed in a year and a half, so I had a lot of footage. And I needed to, make sure that, the story, especially there's no voiceover. So, the story would be, understood. And so, yeah, it took 6 months of my life where, I was just basically in the editing room all the time, and, but just fascinating. It's just hard to move on to something right away when you have, a film like this and a story like this, because, you want to pursue it. You want to make sure that, the story is heard now, now that the, work is done, basically. There's still so much more to do.
Excellent. Richard, some similar questions for you. The students are wanting to know what path you followed to get to be a habeas lawyer in so many of these death penalty cases, but along with that question, almost a similar question, what advice do you have for the students that are interested in getting involved in capital work, defense work, or death penalty reform?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. Basically, I fell into this work. I was asked many, many years ago to take on a capital case by what was then the Texas Resource Center. And the guy had an execution date. We were able to get a stay of execution. And then I just really became sort of obsessed with it. It's really, it was something that I thought that, I was not capable of doing when early in my career. I didn't really have a lot of confidence, and I took this case on, and then it's just sort of snowballed. And so I had no career direction in terms of, oh, I'm going to be a death penalty lawyer when I got out of law school. I didn't know what I was going to do. And it just sort of haphazardly, ad hoc, it devolved into this. And I've not done a lot of cases in California because there's not really a lot of, there's no real death penalty in California. It's de facto death penalty. There's people on death row, but hardly anybody gets executed. So I've always been more interested really in where it's on the cutting edge in Texas. And there's so much, I think these cases will really give people satisfaction. When I first started doing this, I went to a seminar, and the speaker said, you know, when you start doing these cases, if you do them well, it'll really improve your life. It'll give you a lot of satisfaction. But if you do them poorly and you don't really put your heart in it, it will change your life for the worst. Sometimes I think maybe that even if you do them well, if you do them badly, maybe it'll change your life for the worse. I'm being a little facetious here, but I do think that you know, it's a worthy field. It's understaffed tremendously because the resources are not there. You know, people can earn, for instance, doing a death penalty case in California will pay approximately 5 to 7 times as much as a case in Texas for the same amount of work. But I think that, you know, I would encourage people to do it, even though, you know, it takes a toll. It takes a psychological toll. It's hard to see somebody executed, which I've done. And, but, you know, the rewards are great there. You know that you're helping someone who is at the end of their rope. And to me, that's, you know, that's why I do it.
Excellent. Sabrina, what has been the reaction of the family to the film?
Well, the family has not seen, they've not seen the film yet. So we were kind of, you know, waiting. They haven't seen the film. So they're actually going to see the film this coming week. Now, you know, I mean, I don't know what they're going to say. I mean, they've, you know, I've filmed them for 2 years, so they pretty much know, you know, what they've, you know, said to me, but I'm eager to see their reaction. It was the choice of the distributor not to show the film right away and to kind of, you know, wait. And plus the film's been really finished not that long ago. It's hard to just give them links and, you know, I at some point I give them a link about just a little something, and they put it on Facebook. So I was just like, okay, you know, I mean, that's the kind of problems that, you know, you have with them. But no, they haven't seen it yet.
Okay, we're winding down here with time, so I want to give a closing question. And the question is actually for both of you. It's if you could envision one criminal justice reform here in Texas, what would you like to see change about the criminal justice system?
Okay, so for me, who's not a lawyer, there's 2 things. The disparity between, you know, Richard was talking about the money, between, you know, the money that a lawyer gets, you know, to you know, do a case, and the money that the district attorney's office has. The disparity is incredible. It's like, you know, the DA's office, they have, you know, all the money and access to all the experts, and, you know, they can go forever. And then, you know, you have the court-appointed attorney who has very little. So that, yeah, needs to change for sure, because that's just completely, I mean, unfair. So that for sure. And the other thing also for me is that, you know, we're talking about, you know, the court-appointed attorney, Peter Gilman, not bringing, you know, any of the children and all that. And, you know, that was all presented in the various appeals, right? And basically that was his strategy. I don't understand that. But, you know, I don't understand how it could be a lawyer strategy not to bring in anybody to, you know, basically defend a case, not to bring any testimony from anybody. I mean, that's just something that, you know, I don't accept. I don't understand. So I guess that also needs to be, you know, monitored. I mean, just the fact that, you know, a lawyer could just basically have such power, you know, over you know, client's life in a way. I mean, it's shocking to me.
Richard, Sabrina brings up kind of the weight that we feel as lawyers when we are defending someone. And as you said, it takes a toll. I've always said one of the reasons I stopped taking death penalty cases was because they took heartbeats, right? These are really challenging legal cases. The procedural impediments when you're going through the habeas process are very difficult. But if you, looking from the legal perspective, could see one criminal justice reform change, what would that be?
Well, the main one, Sabrina has already hit on it. It's the funding. You know, I practice in 3 states, and the funding is so disparate, so unequal. You know, look, we're doing federal habeas. It should be federal. It should be the same, but it's not. We have unrealistic caps on representations. Right now, half of my cases are pro bono because they're, for one reason or another. You know, a lot of people will just not do this. You know, it's very, very hard. And the other factor is this, and I think that Sabrina's probably seen this, run into this in this case, is that the small town atmosphere often discourages vigorous representation, where your judge appoints you and then wants to move a case. He doesn't want to spend a lot of money on the case. He doesn't want to appoint experts or investigators. And you are sort of under the cloud here. You're under compulsion to really follow the judge's wishes here, which is not in your interest, in the interest of your client. So there's a lot of this small town cronyism. You know, the guy that moves the cases fastest gets the most appointments. You see this, I've seen this in 25, 30 years I've been doing Texas cases, and it's insidious because, you know, in Harris County, in Dallas, you know, you see the attorneys that are billing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They're also taking hundreds and hundreds of cases per year. They cannot do a good job, and yet they are appointed continually because they move the cases quickly. And that's the other factor here that I think needs to change here. You have to have perhaps not the judge appointing these attorneys, but maybe a central appointment bureau, because otherwise the attorneys are going to be compelled to do the judge's bidding that appointed them.
Well, I'll tell you both. We've seen a lot of questions in the Q&A session where folks are showing their gratitude. They're grateful to both of you for bringing this case to light, to you, Sabrina, for bringing this case to light, and Richard, for you carrying through in front of the Fifth Circuit, a difficult legal challenge. How can individuals continue to follow up and keep up with both of your work?
Okay, so there is an hashtag, Free Melissa Lucio. There's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Please just go on it. You know, help us, you know, tweet. I mean, let's make, you know, some noise. This is just really what we can do now. I mean, Richard's doing his part of the job, you know, with, you know, the courts. My part of the job now is, you know, the film is going, is being released on October 20th, and to just really make as much noise as we can and talk about her and talk about Melissa. Because through Melissa, there's just, Melissa represents, you know, indigents. Melissa represents all the wrongly convicted. And, you know, I can say, you know, with all my heart that, you know, Melissa should not, you know, be where she's at right now. There's just no way. And if someone like Melissa Lucio is on death row, and you know, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Because Melissa, you know, someone like Melissa Lucio should never be on death row. So just really just go on Twitter, go on Instagram, go on Facebook, you know, follow us and make some noise.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, whatever happens in the Fifth Circuit, I will keep Sabrina and as many people as I can informed. I should maybe state the obvious here that no matter what happens in the Fifth Circuit, this case will go to the Supreme Court. If the state loses, they'll do cert petition. If we lose, we'll do a cert petition. So that would be the next step here. That process can take 10 months to a year or so. But that's win or lose. That's where the case is headed. The state will almost always go on cert basically if they lose, because they think they have a fairly sympathetic Supreme Court, which they probably do right now, or will soon.
So there are still a couple of questions. Are you guys willing to stay and field these last few questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I was closing it down, and so now we're going to go back in. And Richard, I want to start with you, and you may not be permitted to answer this question, which is why I was hesitant to ask it, but I'll ask it because we're here. What do you think your odds are of succeeding in an en banc proceeding before the Fifth Circuit?
Okay, that's a loaded question. Yeah, let me talk generally. When a case goes en banc, that means that a fair number, a majority, I think, of the judges in the Fifth Circuit, of any Circuit Court of Appeals, believe that there's been some error here. So realistically speaking, one has to acknowledge basically that there are problems here simply because it has gone en banc. Most, the statistics show that, of course, most cases that go from a panel decision to en banc are mostly reversed. So that's what we're up against, and that's just realism. And I'm speaking in general terms here, not in terms of this case, which obviously I think we presented a very, very strong case here. And the state's rationale for going en banc was based on the fallacious argument that the panel decision had set a categorical rule that the defendant had a right to present evidence to discredit a videotaped confession, which there was nothing categorical. There was no rule here at all. So that's why we hope that we will prevail in the Fifth Circuit.
Okay, well, one of the next questions, and I'll start with you, Sabrina, although this has a legal angle as well, Richard, so if you'll both respond, please. There appears to be a sentence disparity in not only this particular case, but with the students that's asked this question, is this case in Chris Watts, who also committed murder. And is that just because we're dealing with disparity in plea bargaining? Is there gender issues that are involved here? Are there race issues involved? What do you attribute the disparity of treatment to Melissa in this case with other individuals who have committed similar crimes but have not either been prosecuted for or received the death penalty? Sabrina.
Krug DA, who is in prison right now. That's my main answer. Someone who has used numerous similar cases like Melissa. There was another case called the Manuel Velez case that the SCLU actually got Manuel Velez, freed him, with exactly the same DA and the same forensic expert out of the Brownsville courthouse. He would, Armando Villalobos, every single time there was a death of a child, would jump in, and I've explained that in the film, because he knew that those were the kind of cases that could help him get reelected. And so I think I'm not wrong in saying that a child abuse case like the one that Melissa is involved in should not be a death row case. I mean, there are very few child abuse cases like that case that are actually on death row. Very few. Check it out. I mean, she's on death row because it was because the DA absolutely wanted her to be on death row, and the judge accepted that. So I guess that's my answer.
I would totally agree with that. This was in the ordinary run of things, this would not be a death penalty case. And regarding the question about Mr. Watts, I did look up his case to refresh my memory. This was a very brutal case. He killed his wife, I think some children. And I think the question was, does this show a disparity? And of course it does, for all of the reasons suggested in the question: race, but a big disparity here is the state in which this was prosecuted in. At the time, Colorado had 3 people on death row. Texas has 260 some odd. So you have a much more willingness to seek the death penalty in states like Texas than you do have in Colorado. The irony is that Mr. Watts got life. He did a deal for life without parole. And despite all these murders and everything, they were willing to offer him that deal. This year, Colorado abolished the death penalty, and so the 3 people on death row were given life without parole. So it didn't really. He would have ended up the same place anyways. Is what I'm saying. So, but yes, I would say a big factor is the state in which you are prosecuted makes a huge difference as to the willingness of the prosecutor to seek the death penalty. And not only that, the community in the state in which you reside makes a big difference too. So.
Okay, excellent. And Richard, this question is probably well suited to you. The question is, I noticed a string of systemic failures throughout the documentary that led to this wrongful outcome. I'm specifically mentioning the coercive questioning, plea bargaining, and even the living conditions of Melissa and her children. How do you suggest we tackle these failures to prevent outcomes like Melissa's moving forward?
Well, we certainly have to have more, a better conscience here and care for the poor, the people like Melissa who basically have not been dealt a good hand in life. There's the disparity here, the economic inequality here that is getting worse and worse. The situation for a lot of these people is desperate. They get into drugs because they have nothing to look forward to. They don't have jobs. We've got to, it would entail a huge reorientation here of our priorities in society, I think. You have a poor woman, she's got many children. She was not the mother of the year here. We're not saying that, but she did try her best with the children she had. She had a serious drug problem. But let's devote some resources instead of just punitive resources, prisons, building more prisons. And in Texas, there's so many for-profit prisons, which boggles the mind of Europeans. Why don't we devote more time to keeping people out of prisons through drug programs, getting people off of drugs, getting people job training, things like that. So to me, that's where the direction we've got to go, and it's emphatically not the direction we are going.
If I may, it's also the methods of interrogations that needs to be changed. Absolutely. Innocence Project, out of all the people they managed to, free, I think 85% of them had admitted. So clearly this is not working out. And very little investigation whatsoever. The cops in Melissa's case, what did they investigate? They got in there at 7 p.m. She was basically they started the interrogation at 8:30, and by 3 in the morning, she was just convicted. What did they investigate? What was the investigation all about? So there's no investigation. Their method basically, getting a person to admit is really, has showed over and over again. And the Innocence Project, they have showed that it's just not a proper way of doing things. And it's, getting a lot of innocent people in prison.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, there's so many cases. I personally have had something, at least 3 or 4 false confession cases. False confessions are not rare. People think they are. It's not true. People do confess falsely. The cops are allowed to lie to people. They're allowed to say, look, if you don't tell us this is how it went down, that you're going to get the death penalty, and then turn around and give them the death penalty. This goes on all the time. And I just think that people are just not aware of the prevalence of these false confession type cases.
You know, I noticed early on, Sabrina, when you were introducing your film, you said that Melissa's biggest mistake was that she acquiesced to the interrogation. And I used that quote. I followed it closely because one of the cases we do teach in criminal procedure is Miranda. And we spend a lot of time, at least in my class, talking about false confessions and the police tactics that you're bringing up, Richard, that the police can be dishonest, but you can't lie to the police. That's an offense, but they can be dishonest. And as you indicate, Sabrina, and 5 different interrogators, that would certainly disrupt an individual. And when we consider the length of the interrogation, the time of day, as you're saying, she wasn't giving food or drink. And so I think highlighting that is really important. The last question at this point, although I may ask one final, I may take my moderator's prerogative. It's to you, Sabrina, and I think it's maybe because we're as lawyers starting to feel a little frustrated about all this. How do we get into investigative filmmaking?
Well, that's easy. That's easy for you, right? I mean, you start by the beginning, by like reading everything, basically just reading and reaching out to people. It's always very interesting to see what people have to say. But I mean, I think that, we need a lot of good lawyers out there who start understanding victims. I think that's what we need to do, is start understanding, victims. The way I see it, really, I mean, do people really understand, flawed characters? I keep talking about flawed characters like Melissa Lucio. There's a lot of flawed characters out there, I think that, we need to start really understanding these people, as lawyers. But yeah, I mean, really, don't get into, investigative reporting. Just stick to become, great lawyers, and just let's try to make the system just a little, better.
Well, again, I want to reiterate, I think investigative journalists have done a tremendous job for us as lawyers, pointing out the injustices, whether it's income, whether it's race, flawed characters, whether it's a lack of investigation, whether it's corrupt prosecutors. I mean, there's so much that your film reveals that is broken about the system that we're fighting here in Texas. And it is a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift for lawyers, but it couldn't be accomplished without filmmakers and investigative journalists like yourself. So I want to say thank you as a practicing attorney here and lawyer. Before we close out, I'm going to toss it to each of you, a very open-ended question, which is, assuming I've failed as a moderator, what is the one question you wish you would have received this evening from me that you didn't? And a piece of information you might like to share with the students in our audience in clothing. So I'll start with you, Richard, and let you do that, and then we'll end the evening with Sabrina, the filmmaker. So Richard.
I can't think of any. I think you've done a superb job of moderating. I really think that this discussion was really brought a lot of background to the film, and I think that's what it was designed to do, and I think it did it. So thank you for including me on this.
Excellent.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, really, you've asked every single question that I could think of. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us, and make some noise about cases like these.
Well, again, I thank you both, but I think another round of gratitude should go to the student organizations who put this together. And so Bessie, I'd like to turn it over to you and just say thank you so much for including me. I really enjoyed the film. I enjoyed this discussion. And I appreciate all the work you and the student organizations do to make the noise that Sabrina says we need to be making. So thank you for being a noisemaker.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we're happy to make some noise where it's needed. First, thank you to Sabrina and Richard again for being here. Thank you for all the work so far on helping Melissa. We're lucky and we're grateful that there are people like you who are putting in the work to help and protect people who don't have anyone else to help them. Thank you to Professor Penrose. Thank you to Professor Alcon for helping put all this together and for a phenomenal job moderating. Thanks to all the organizations that helped sponsor this. We had so many people who helped advertise and promote this, from the Women's Law Student Association to the Latinx Law Student Association, the Women of Color Collective. Thank y'all. Of course, I'm biased toward the Criminal Law Society. Thank y'all for promoting that. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions today, and we appreciate y'all being here and your interest. Please, I posted the hashtag and their Twitter in the chat. Please go follow that. Please spread the word about Melissa. Also, all we can do is, if we're not Richard right now, all we can do is spread the word and try to get the public interested in this case. In the next month, our friends at the Latinx Law Student Association have a few events coming up. You can register to attend them at TAMULawAnswers.info. They should be incredible, and we always want to support other orgs and their events. And they're in the chat, you can find the link to go register for this. And then lastly, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. WILSA, the Family Law Student Association, and the Women of Color Collective are teaming up with Safe Haven to collect supplies needed for the women in our community who really need it most. There's boxes all over the law school and at the Sheraton to collect things. These are women in situations who really need the help, and we'd appreciate anything y'all can do to drop supplies off. And if you aren't comfortable going to law school right now, let us know and we'll pick up supplies from you. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.